up my video for a bit. Are you able to hear me clearly?
Yeah, we can hear you well.
All right. Thanks, colleagues. Ideally, I think it is best if we were available in person, but because of the policy that we are still working under, we are still working from home. And we're hoping that maybe any time from August, we will start going to the office, and these challenges will be a thing of the past. So, like I was introduced, my name is Robson Chiwumba. I'm currently the Deputy Country Representative for FEWSNET. And yes, I was before that, I was with the Ministry of Agriculture in the Crops Branch Department, where I was working as the wheat specialist. Unfortunately, I cannot able to see your faces, but I hope this will be a thing of the past. Right, so I'm going to share my screen where I have a small presentation in terms of the regional outlook in terms of maize supply. Right, maybe before I do that, I just want to give you a background that as FEWSNET, we do food security analysis, where we have a number of components that we put together in our food security analysis. We look at issues on markets and trade. We look at issues on livelihoods. We look at issues on nutrition, as well as the agroclimatology. So all these combined, we then do a current situation analysis, as well as a forecast in terms of how the food security situation can evolve. So right now, today, we are going to be looking at just on markets, and specifically maize supply on those markets. So let me share my screen for the presentation. Right. I hope you are able to see this. Any confirmation? Tony, Michael?
Yes, Robson. I can see
so
from my end.
So let me.
Yes, we can.
Yes, thank you. So let me go ahead. Right. So the markets and trade department, we've got a full where we have a regional specialist who is currently based in Zambia right now, who does a lot of analysis in terms of issues on markets. So when you are just looking at the maize supply in the region, this is just one small part of the analysis that we will probably discuss today. Right, looking at maize production by country in the region, we see that all the countries in the region, they had a production which was lower than last year. Our 2021-2022 production was lower than last year. And please note, these are millions, right? So looking at specific countries, we have some which had very which had very low production as compared to last year, such as if you look at Zimbabwe, it had about 43% below what was produced last year. Looking at Lesotho, it had about 61% compared to what was produced last year, 61% drop. Then although maybe Lesotho, Botswana are not really major producing maize countries, but we have Zambia, which had about a 25% drop. South Africa, 13%, Malawi minus 16%, which are quite significant decreases from the past year. But as we know, this was mainly due to the drought, poor rainfall distribution that occurred in most of these countries or in the region. So there was a drop in terms of production, but last year, generally, the region had quite some good production, also owing to the favorite season that was prevailing in the last year. So generally, if we look at just the absolute figures here, it will point to some deficits in terms of maize production across the region. But however, we have to make some consideration in terms of carryover stock, some opening stock that will be coming from the previous year, that would then maybe have an effect in the 2022-2023 marketing year, right? So our 2022-2023 marketing year will be stretching from the harvest period, which was there in last April or May across the region, and it will stretch into the next year just before the harvest period again, just before maybe around March, somewhere around there. So this is the marketing year that we are talking about. So the production plus the carryover stock would then inform the availability of grain in the marketing year. So looking at the current marketing year, and again, it was just about average when we compare it to the 5-year average. But then we had a very big carryover stock, or maybe also owing to the favorable production that was coming from the previous season, right? So the harvest from the 2021-22 production season was 3% below average. Right, it was just almost average, and it was 15% lower than last season. It was quite significantly lower than the last season if we were to look at the figures. But the carryover stock into the 2022-2023 marketing year, which was 31% above average, also came in to offset the below average harvest, which was experienced across the region. So supplies are near average, but 11% lower than last season, right? So the supply, which is there regionally, is just about average. If the average that we are looking at is just a 5-year average, so the supply is just about average, all right? So looking at the supply, we have an exportable surplus that is existing in the region, which is about 6% over, just 106%, in terms of self-sufficiency, but it is 8% below average. But if we were to look at country by country in terms of countries in the area, which is abbreviated here ZA, which is about 62% below average net supplies. Right? If we were to look at the graph here, the blue is the current net supply, and the red one here is the FEFE average. Then the gray part is the net supply for last year. So if you are just to look at this, South Africa is one of the biggest maize producers in the region, where the net supply is currently significantly low compared to the FEFE average, as well as compared to what was there last year, right? So if we're looking at net supply, it's a calculation where we look at the supply as a combination of the production and the opening stock. That is what is making up the supply. But then we discount the requirements, what the country requires for consumption, could it be human consumption, as well as other industrial uses. And we also discount the strategic grain reserve, because that is a reserve that is supposed to be available, or maybe to act as a reserve just to be available without being used. So if we discount that, that is giving us what we are terming here as the net supply, right? The grain that is supposed to be available for any other uses, could it be consumption or you know, or exports or anything, right? So Zambia is about 67% above average net supply. This was due to significantly above average carryover stock from the last season. So we see Zambia here, although maybe it's also the net supply is below the last year's net supply. But Tanzania, here we also see that its net supply, it was just about average, although it's also below last year's net supply, right? Malawi was also significantly below average. The current net supply is significantly below average, as well as significantly below what was available last year. Then in the region, we have these deficit countries, which we call structurally deficit countries, where where maybe climatic conditions do not allow for. They are not major maize producing countries. We have Madagascar, we have the DRC, here the Congo. We have here, which is abbreviated BLNE, which is Botswana, Lesotho, Namibia, and Eswatini. These are structurally deficit countries, and they year in, year out usually rely on imports. Then apparently Zimbabwe, we also have some negative net supply, after discounting our requirement, after discounting our strategic grain reserve from the supply that we have from the production and the opening stock. We are also in the deficit as a country. Right, so looking at the trade flows, how these countries maybe would converge in terms of the relationship between the trade of grain. South Africa continues to be, as it is the major producer, it continues to export maize. regionally as well as to international markets where prices are currently elevated. So the regional prices are there, and the international prices for grain are also available. But South Africa is also exporting to any other international countries just besides the regional countries. So we are also tracking the South African prices, which we also compare to the international prices. And I'll show you a table where we have some values from the South African Futures Exchange, where prices fluctuate maybe on a weekly basis. Then these high prices are also affecting, these structurally deficit countries, which I mentioned, the Botswana, Lesotho, Namibia, as well as Eswatini, which would definitely maybe import in every year. So they're also being affected by these high prices that are prevailing in South Africa. So regionally, there's a competition for limited white maize, specifically white maize, for human consumption as well as animal feeds, because a lot of in the industry, a lot of these industrial feed making, they usually also use the white maize for making feeds. So there's a high competition in terms of procuring or maybe accessing white maize in the region. So imports from outside of Africa, they also remain expensive, and there's a time lag in terms of exporting from other countries outside of Africa. It will take a lot of time for that grain to come in individual countries, because of the logistics and so forth. Then what is a bit atypical right now is that some other countries that were in the region, they usually used to source grain from Uganda, from Tanzania, but now they have come in closer to home, where they're also sourcing grain from Zambia, South Africa, and Malawi, because they also follow the trends, and maybe they were also affected by by low production, and they would come in where maybe grain is a bit affordable, and they're also sourcing from the same basket, where as a region we also source from. So there's quite some competition in terms of looking for grain in the region. Right. So looking at the maize prices, like what I said, the South African futures exchange market, these prices they fluctuate on a weekly basis. So it's advisable maybe to track these prices and see maybe where best it is cheaper for, if you're an importing country, for you to import, but they do vary. Like in this case, they are on May 23, they were around 270. Then the next week it was 268, 255. It appears if the prices were going down, but in essence they do fluctuate. Sometimes they also go up, and it's important for countries to track and see how exactly these prices would be going, because even the small margin would affect when you're purchasing quantities that are quite huge. Right. So looking at domestic prices, you know, when we also monitor what will be happening within the region in terms of the prices per kg. Some certain markets in Zimbabwe here, where we have prices in US dollar, right? So the prices do fluctuate according to season. If the season was favorable and there was much production, prices tend to go down. If the season was had a low production, you know, prices also tend to go up. You know, of noticing currently is that you know, there's a seasonal decline in USD price from after harvest. But what we are also forecasting is that this drop is likely to be short-lived, especially, you know, considering the low production that to the seasonal trend, but they remained elevated. You know, they were above the last year in most countries across the region. Then they're also above the 5-year average, particularly for South Africa, right? So it's one of the importance. It has a bearing to do with access domestically, right? So although estimates of this year's maize harvests are lower than last year, the availability of maize supplies will not be effective to stem the unexpected rise in prices, since the drivers that have triggered soaring food and other commodity prices are mainly exogenous. So there are other factors that are also coming in to affect maize prices. You know, although we have some supplies that are available, that we talked about as being average or maybe near average, but there are other factors that also come in. You know, the issues of the global food prices that are going up. They also affect maize prices, or maybe also include maize prices. Issues of fuel prices going up, the cost of production that is being affected by you know, rising fertilizer prices and so forth. You know, because of the issues that are there in Ukraine. So there are a lot of global outside factors that also come into to affect the prices of maize. Although we have an average maize supply, but prices are also likely to go up. So generally, maybe summing this up, we are looking at a regional demand for white maize, which is expected to be above average in the market in this marketing season. Grain prices are also expected to trade at above average levels in the marketing period. You know, like I mentioned, because of the low production that prevailed across the region. Then we are also expecting a prolonged disruption to global trend in cereals and fertilizers due to the war in Ukraine. You know, fertilizers play a very big role in terms of production, and this could also significantly worsen the affordability and availability of staple foods across the region. And now this is a long term, not just looking at this marketing season, but looking at even beyond. In the long term, global prices are bound maybe to be up in terms of staple maize or maize prices. So basically, this is what this is the short analysis we had as FEWSNET, and it's maybe back to you in the room for any discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Robson. Can you hear? Thanks a lot, Robson. Are there any questions for Robson from anyone? So I've got a question, Robson. So I think Zimbabwe still pursues a policy of not allowing genetically modified maize into the country, and we see that of all the countries in the region, South Africa probably has one of the biggest surpluses. So do you have any idea of the size of the GM-free crop in South Africa?
Apparently, no, I don't have those statistics available, but it will be something that is worth looking for, because if we are going to expect maybe any imports from South Africa, there would definitely maybe be non-GMO because of that standing policy that we have. But apparently, maybe I don't have any figures that that will help us now. But it's something worth considering looking for. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. We have some traders in the room. Any ideas?
Mike, as far as we know, government is actually open to the idea of GM imports. It just needs to be direct to miller. So they won't allow third parties to hold from a commingling or contamination point of view. But I would have thought too, if it's for milling for roller meal, government would probably promote the idea of roller meal coming in, as opposed to maize to mill outside of specific to the stock feed sector.
Okay.
But it is being allowed. It's just that you have to have government inspectors at your premises to monitor the milling. But maize from South Africa is also not the cheapest right now. The region is actually pricing to South Africa. So I think Zambia had about 200,000 tons available for export. I would have thought on a stock gap, that's probably where it's going to come from, logistically and price-wise.
Okay, so as Zimbabwe, we'll probably be getting our maize from Zambia.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good to hear. Sort of any other discussion points or questions for Robson? If not, we'll move on to our next speaker. So thanks very much, Robson, for the update. Much appreciated. And you can sit back now and and listen to the presentation from Ministry. Thanks.
Thank you.
Tony, are you able to get the Ministry presentation? Okay. So I'd like to introduce Professor Ogajiri from Ministry. Come up. So since I think there's been a fair amount of restructuring going on in Ministry, so I don't even know your title. Maybe you could share that. I think there's a chief in there somewhere.
Yeah.
Would you stand here so that
Thank you. Please allow me to remove this mask for the time of the presentation. Can I do that?
Yes, please.
Okay. Anyway, I see most of you don't have masks, so I think I'm okay. And thanks, Mike. I hope it will come up. I got so busy. I got your message in the morning to say, please send me your biography and so forth. So, but I was so busy, I couldn't.
It's fine. Maybe you can do a self biography.
Yeah. So, I'm not married. That's a good way to start, isn't it? I'm not married. I have 4 kids, 4 girls. Okay, so that's my title there. I am a chief, definitely. Just a chief director for agricultural and rural development advisory services. So for those who are familiar with ministry, that is what used to be called Agri-Tex. So now we have restructured, and it's now that directorate, which still includes Agri-Tex at the bottom, but we are now responsible for crops. So we have a crops department, we have a livestock department, we have a fisheries department. We also have a training and information department, and we have a migratory pests department. So those are the 5 departments that I lead, which cascade downwards at the bottom. Obviously, you are all familiar with the Agri-Tex officers on the ground. So those are my officers down there. We still call them Agri-Tex officers because they still deal with technical and extension services. So that's basically me. Obviously, I am new at the ministry. I was at the university for 20 years. So I probably have met a couple of you, including Mike, I think, here. And wherever I go, I see a lot of my students. So anyone who passed through university from 2004 and claim to have done agriculture and they don't know me, fire them quickly. It means they are not who they claim to be. So I will present on what came out of the assessments that we did for the 2021-2022 season, basically. So we do these assessments. The first one is obviously before the season starts or when the season starts. And then the second one is the one that we do to assess performance and the harvest. So we assess all crops and livestock and fisheries. We do assess all those. So I will touch mainly on the crops. And so this will advise the nation on what comes out of the cropping season. And then we also, outside ZIMVAC or before ZIMVAC, we give indicators of which areas might be deficit in terms of particularly grain. So this we really carry out as robust as we can. But having come from university, I also want to triangulate this and make sure that it's as authentic as we can. So I will present what my predecessors did and produced this. But I can assure you, if you are available again next year, I will present it in a very different format, which we are formulating now, and making sure that it's well triangulated and reducing the need for arguments in terms of figures. I think you can move to the next slide. So that's basically what I will do. And you can move to the next slide, which basically shows us, next slide. So it basically shows us how we performed in the various crops this past season. So we compare that obviously with the previous season. Those figures are, what Robson presented is basically our figures there. We had a dip of 43% in terms of maize, but overall we also had a dip of 47% in terms of all crops that we produced. So African peas, for those that don't know, that's cowpeas, because we think that saying cow is just not good. It's, what do you call it? Demeaning to say cow. What is cow about it? It's African peas, more like it. More like we say the sorghum, pearl millet, and finger millet are traditional grains rather than small grains. We don't want that language. So that is what we produce. So that's just a map which shows us how we performed this last season. I know that the argument with most critics is that, so how, where is the 1.5 million tons? But I can assure you that that figure is correct, because we do have, in every ward, we have 2 or 3 extension workers. In fact, we have 4,768 extension workers dotted across all the 1,600 wards in the country, across the 60 districts that the agricultural districts that we operate in those 8 provinces of the 8 agricultural provinces. So those are the source of our data. They go to each farm and make sure that they get the yield estimate from there. So if anything is close to the truth, that's this figure. Anything else would be a statistical estimation. This is not a statistical estimation. It's really actual. So the maize is out there. If you drive, maybe you see some still standing in the field now in July, because the moisture is too high, because the price of GMB is too low. So you would rather store it in the field than harvest it and incur costs. So we know that, but basically that yield there is what we have in Zimbabwe. We as agritechs, we are not worried about where it is, although we would rather it's in GMB, but all that will probably not come into GMB, just like the 2.7 million last season. We cannot be able to ascertain where it is. For example, I think about 900,000 metric tons came into GMB last season, but so where is the 2 million tons? Is those questions that keep being asked, but the truth of the matter is that it's out there with the farmers. Some keep it for food cover, some keep it until they know what's gonna happen in the next season, and then they dispose. Some, they do all what they can, but we get the figures, and I can guarantee you that those figures are as correct as they are. You can move to the next slide. So this is the production by province. So basically, our biggest producer is Mash West. So that's the best producer in terms of all crops, even including tobacco. Mash West, we call it Mash Best. So the Mashonaland provinces, Mash West is the best. It produces the best, followed by Mash Central, and then followed by Mash East. So that's basically the Mashonaland provinces that produce the bulk of what we eat. Obviously, you have Manicaland and Midlands follow it very closely, and then always the provinces that are always in need are your Manicaland, Masvingo, and Matabeleland provinces. So when we do our programming, this is what we look at. We will see in the next slides that we segregate all these. But on the right there, you will see that the A2s and communal areas are the big movers in terms of contribution to maize production. So the communal areas are always ahead. So that you always see the huge contribution of the communal areas. But the A2s, who are our commercial, they are also coming up. A1, they are more like commercial as well, but they have a bit of a business orientation. So you will see that A1s also contribute quite a bit. You can move to the next slide. In terms of sorghum, this is the scenario. Again, Mash Best performs quite well. And you see that even when we want the drier regions are more suitable for traditional grains, but you still see them not performing well. The reason there is the less targeted approach in terms of traditional grains. So this year you will see a big variation in terms of how we target these, the production of these. You can move to the next slide. In terms of pearl millets, I think the story changes a bit. I can use this one to change.
That's for the videos online.
Okay, no, that's fine. So in terms of pearl millet, again, the story is there, but you should see the low production in terms of traditional grains, when we should actually have quite a bit of traditional grains, particularly because of climate change and climate variability. We will deliberately in this coming season target these traditional grains for those climate challenged communities. You can move to the next slide. I think this one, I see many of us have very eyes that are struggling. We'll pass this one, but it basically shows the average yield per household. So our source of data is household data. So if in the actual report you see a lot of the tables that are very detailed per household, per ward, per village, per district, and so forth. You see all that data. What you eventually see as the report is the cleaned out report, which then is more aggregated. You can move on to the next slide. I think you can move. This one again is the same thing. And then, yeah, so move to the next slide. In terms of what we require as a nation, which is what then advises policy, our national requirement is basically about 2.2 million tons of grain, including stock feeds. So, but in terms of consumption, we need about 1.8 million tons. So in terms of what was available for cereals, that's when we include the maize, that's 1.7 million tons. It means we had a deficit of that 65,000 metric tons. So here we have included the traditional grains. If you remove the traditional grains, you will see that our deficit for maize alone would be about 100,000 metric tons. So when you then saw what happened after that, we recommended that GMB, because they were at that time in April, they were holding about 500,000 metric tons of maize. We then said we need to secure the strategic grain reserve. So we stopped stock feeds manufacturers from accessing what they should. So we cut that a bit so that we preserve the SGR. But what we then recommended to government was for them to allow the stock feed manufacturers to import maize for that purpose, because we believe in the country, within the country, we do have enough maize for consumption. If we put the 1.5 million tons that we have plus what's in the SGR, we were already past that consumption requirement, the annual consumption that we have. So we do have enough food in the country. You will see in the next slides that maybe it's a matter of where is the surplus and where is the deficit, which is where ZIMFA comes in to really map that as well. But we will give them, we would have given them indications. So the 300,000 metric tons or 400,000 metric tons that was allowed for the stock feed manufacturers to import, it comes from this matrix here. This is where the decision is made. But we're not worried about the groundnuts and all that. Those are good, but they don't really define our food security status. We can move to the next slide. So in terms of the deficit areas, the map of where it's really bad and for how long. So in April, when we produced this report, April, May, we we analyzed all these, and we said that, so what you see in red are the areas that are in dire stress, and then the green ones are those areas that are food secure. So definitely your Mashonaland West and Mashonaland Central and Mashonaland East, those are basically food secure. But as you go to the south and to the west, Matabeleland, parts of Manicaland, and Mashigo, those are really deficit. And we analyze to see which districts are not food secure, or are food secure for how long. So for example, in Mat South, we know that Bedbridge and Mangwe don't have food. So from the time we did the assessment in April, May, June, their food is finished. Those are already on support in terms of food. So this one gives the initial indicator of which areas are not sufficient in terms of food. And ZIMVAC will take from this table, and then they go and really do the matrix of who is vulnerable in this community, and they target their food aid, and they advise the NGOs and everyone to know where is the need. So this is what we would have given, but we go a step before this, so we can even give you the wards that are not, that have surplus and that don't have surplus. So the original source of data is actually in the ward, in the households that we know didn't produce enough. So this is basically what we also then make sure that ZIMVAC gets access to immediately after the report. So that's why ZIMVAC comes immediately after our report to go and ground truth these and come up with recommendations for government and for the development sector. We can move on to the next slide. So basically, so where do I point?
The next right.
Okay. So where do I point? Where?
No, just in.
So basically, this is what we were talking about in terms of where is the deficit. So you didn't tell me that I should not do it very fast. When you give instructions, give them fully, so that so the middle one gives what?
It's just place, and then if you want to point, you press at the bottom.
This one?
No, here. At the bottom here.
Oh, okay. Oh, yes. So you see Mashonaland West, that's where our food is. And Mashonaland Central, there is surplus. And everywhere else, it's not, So Harare, for example, because we don't grow anything, and Bulawayo, so we are net consumers. So we do have a deficit in these urban areas. So that's why you find even in the urban areas, we really need support in terms of food production, food access as well. This tries to give us what was the average household stock is at April, but obviously this changes with consumption, and but we try to track, and this is what also ZIMVAC tries to use to come up with their recommendation. Again, we try to analyze and say, so what is the food insecurity risk that we have? So you'll find that we know that 38% of our households are really cereal insecure, and obviously in the past season this was 27%, and Mat North is the biggest in terms of risk of hunger. So this we also give as the initial indicator, and this is ground truthed by ZIMVAC and so forth. Again, this is another way of putting it, where we say, so what size of the population in each province could be food insecure. So this again we look at. So that is basically in terms of the cereals performance, the cereals and the food insecure, what we really call, this is where the noise is in terms of food security for the country and the initial production figures that we produce as agri-techs. I know that many people then get worried about these figures, but the reason why they employed a professor is to make sure that these things are properly analyzed. So like I told you, we will change a bit, but this is the best method which most countries actually took from. And I've looked at the South African model, which is largely commercial in their production. We take things from there and the methods from there, but we also continue to really polish our own method and make sure that it is as authentic as possible. But for this year, that is how that was the outlook for, that is the outlook for this year. In terms of livestock, these are, so I also am responsible for livestock. So we look at beef, dairy, goats, and all the small stock, including broilers and roadrunners and donkeys and everything. What's important here is to note that in terms of beef, at peak, you would remember that we were moving at about 9 million in terms of beef cattle, our beef head. And this is what made the CSCs. What the problem is with CSC in Blawayo, for example, is because as long as we are not hitting close to 7 million beasts, that plant cannot be utilized because it needs beasts to be moving there every minute, which is what we don't have at the moment. So the challenge for us is to really grow this beef herd to at least 7 million. If we can get to 9 million, will be good. Then we can turn on that CSC plant in Blawayo. That one, the Chinwe one, we can't even talk about, and the Mashingo one. If we wake up the Blawayo giant, will be good to go. In terms of dairy, again, we can't turn on that 1 million liter plant, dairy body in Blawayo, because it needs 1 million liters every month. So with the current head of dairy, which stands at 40,000 milking cows, we can't wake up that giant. So milk has to move from Sagemo farm in Bulilima, a dairy board, all the way to the dairy board plant in Chipinge to be processed. That's how they have to, because they can only wake up the Chipinge one, it's small. The Blawayo one, which needs 1 million liters, cannot wake up because the quantities are not enough. So for our dairy head and for our beef head, we need to increase the numbers. The milking cows from 40 to about 70,000. That will make sure that we have, for dairy, we have the 150 million liters that the country requires, as opposed to what we produced last season, which is about 79.6 million liters of milk. Again, this is the quantities of milk that we track every month and every year. So obviously, you would see that it's closely related to what we have. So these offtake rates really define what we have, and therefore the amount of why your beef, for example, becomes very expensive. We don't have enough beef in the country. So those we have it, they have to price it at what they want. We also track these things in terms of the other types of meat, the province and so forth. So we have meat graders all over the country. So those track what has been slaughtered and the grades and so forth across the country. In terms of poultry, we also track the amount of eggs that are produced, the amount of day-old chicks that are produced, and what the various players do. So this is the situation in 2021, and we would want to up this as well. We are not producing enough. Obviously, if you have seen the proliferation of the chicken in brand, for example, and so you ask yourself, where are these broilers coming from, and etc., etc. You would see that there is business. People are consuming these products, but we actually don't have enough of eggs and enough of meat. The small changes that you see there just to show you how pathetic we are doing in terms of egg production, for example, and even day-old sheep production. So in terms of milk, like I was saying, in 2021, we produced 79.6, and this is for 2020 actually. This year we are doing pretty much well. We are 20% above our performance for last year, but our target is to get to the 120 million liters that is basically required in the country. But at peak, we need about 150 million liters if we include all the powders that are imported currently. So this, again, for those who are into investment, this is a big opportunity. 79 and 120, that's almost half of what we need if we just put it at 150 million liters. The basic problems there is our head is very small and our genetics are wrong, and we have the wrong feeding regimes. We feed mainly, our cows are fed from the shelf, which means that we buy in feeds. That's a very expensive model. And our challenge, which you want to help me, is to make sure that we have a model which is cheaper in terms of feeding these cows. But we do need to increase the dairy head, which means we need to either import or encourage people to breed heifers for milk. So those are the challenges there, but there is a big deficit in the dairy sector, which we are actively looking at right now. Some of these things are not important, but we have introduced a fisheries department, which is why you see on the name of the ministry there is a fisheries now. So Zinwa itself has 1,200 dams, but you know that we have more than 10,000. In fact, we have 10,470 water bodies across the country. If we add the 10 that we are constructing now, Shangani and so forth, we'll be on 10,480 by the end of next year. So all those water bodies need to be utilized. If you check in terms of fish, Matemba is produced in Kariba. That's where Matemba is, isn't it? Yeah, but for those who eat Matemba, anywhere in the country, it means that that Matemba came from Kariba all the way to Chipinge to be eaten. So even if you don't want that kg of Matemba to be expensive, there's no way. Put fuel, and you are already on it. Then put labor, and put whatever you want. So we really need to make sure that we move fish from Kariba, fish production from Kariba to everywhere else in the country. So this fisheries department really looks at pond production of fish, stocking water bodies and dams, and also making sure that we promote certain production methods. For example, the cage culture, to make sure that it's a business, so that we have people who are in business in the dams. So we know that most of our dams, so most of our water bodies are stocked with this invasive species called tilapia. So this one, when it comes to your water body, it takes over everything. It will eat other fish and everything. But it's a very nice fish. This is what we normally eat. The challenge for us is to introduce other indigenous fish, which are not as much invasive as tilapia, But for most of what we have, most of the water bodies already have tilapia, and we are stuck with it. But we will make sure that we introduce some. So the target for this season is to make sure that we stock some of these dams. In fact, we are stocking 300 dams this season out of these dams that are across the provinces. So we are tracking these dams, each one of them in each province, in each district, and so forth, and making sure that we really target 300, which we are stocking this year. I'm talking of this year because right now the fish season is off season, and we are busy building up fingerlings to make sure that we can stock some of these dams and the fish ponds. And so we are tracking all the private fish ponds and the public ones as well to make sure that we have what we have. Of course, I say we are tracking. So this is the total number of fish ponds that is available in the country and increasing. So we really track the functional ones, the non-functional ones, and so forth, and help in terms of technical capacity to bring those non-functional to being functional, and make sure that we have at least a nutritional security at household level. In terms of fingerlings, we really don't have enough of the fingerlings in the country. Like I said, the bulk is really tilapia, which we don't want, but we also have muramba and other species which we have. The challenge for us is to grow these indigenous ones and make sure that we have enough of those. Crocodile, I won't talk about this because this is the area that I have failed so far, but I will tell you next time when you invite me that what I would have done in terms of crocodile, but I can't talk about this because I have not succeeded. So thank you very much. I think this is the situation that you called me to tell you. I don't know whether it's good or bad, but that is what it is. So now you can clap hands for me as I sit down.
But before you sit down, Prof, are there any questions or comments for Prof. Jerry? Usman?
Yes. Thank you so much, Professor, for the detailed overview of the situation in our country. It's much appreciated. Just one question, which is a methodological one, in terms of determining food security. I realize it's, and it's not only Zimbabwe, it's biased towards cereals, you know, cereal deficiency. Why is that the case, given that if you look at households, they don't only eat cereals, you know, they have a package. Why is the focus really on maize and not other foods which are important for a household's nutrition and food needs?
Yeah, so thank you. I think our staple food is really cereal. That's why we track that. But we also do track the other non-cereals that we also track. So the bias on cereals is because it is the bulk of what is required. If we don't, what have you done here? Allow me to move this thing. This is probably the best way I use technology, or the only place. In ministry, these things are not there, you know. I can take it. Oh, thank you. You have in the presence of all these witnesses, I've been allowed to collect this. What am I doing? Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. So this is the bulk of what we require, the cereals. So that's why we are biased towards these cereals. But we also do track these. And we know what's required for all the requirements in the food security basket. So we don't only track cereals, we track some of these. In fact, we do have, for sweet potato, for example, in our horticulture branch, we are rolling out. I think so far we have rolled out 2.3 million vines of sweet potato to try and make sure that we do have the balanced diet. And for sugar beans, for example, we are also rolling this out in terms of our presidential input support program. So there is, in our FEWSNET program that we are doing this season, there is sunflower, there is sugar beans, there is cowpea in that package. So
African pea, not cowpea.
Yes, African pea. Thank you. So we do have in that package. So, and obviously we do have cereals, which is the bulk. So we're not only tracking the cereals, but we also try to promote these other crops as well. Thank you.
Jane.
Thanks, Prof, very much. There was quite a lot of new data there, which is interesting. I think it's relevant that production deficit area does suggest a risk of food insecurity, but particularly for places in Matabele North, just because they're not producing their own food doesn't automatically assume they're food insecure. It's like, you know, if you showed us that Harare had a deficit of 300,000 tons, so you wouldn't suggest that we all go and give food to everyone in Harare, because the main way they get their food is to purchase it. So I think you can't automatically, I mean, there is a risk of food insecurity, but I don't think you can automatically say that all of those red areas need food aid or are food insecure, particularly Matabele North, because that's where all your livestock are. So what should really be happening is people should be selling their goats or their cattle to buy food, or they're working somewhere else, like across the border, to buy food. So I think we need to get away from food security just being own production. I understand that for a whole nation, it is important to have a fairly high level of food self-sufficiency, but food deficit areas don't automatically mean that they're food insecure.
Yes, very much agreed. And that's why we have the second layer of this assessment being done by Zimbabwe to exactly do that. But more importantly, like you say, this is Matabele, right? So I was in Caesar a month ago, and in that ward, I saw 90 tons of pure millet. So you can't say that word is, but here is red. And what's happening there is they produce all that, and they want to produce it for sale. They don't want to sell it to GMB. They don't declare it, and then they sell it to Botswana. That's all they do. So yes, you are very right. What we just do in terms of our assessment is the rudimentary, the exact of what, well, you know, how this area is food insufficient. It will really come from the Zimbabwe assessments and so forth. There are a whole lot of factors, but this gives us an indication of what can be. That's why we can't really, from the global figure, we can't say where is the deficit in actual effect. You would think that these areas, people are already dying. But you go to Beitbridge, there's no food aid at the moment. But our recommendation was watch these. But when you go there, they have their own ways of getting food, for example. And what we have also said, for those areas that produce surplus of traditional grains, for example, they can swap this with maize. So that happens a lot. So you find in Mashonaland areas, for example, Mash West, they would easily feed some of the Matabele and North, and so they do their trading and so forth. So yes, it doesn't necessarily convert into risk in terms of hunger. So, but that is you know, from agritech, we're worried with production. The next level is you know.
Mine is not a question as such, Professor, but I just want to come back to your opening statement where you said in the following year, or next time when you present we're gonna see a different presentation in terms of how the numbers are presented. Is because in certain forums that I've said, there's been arguments where presenters were just throwing numbers in way which are not really authenticated. So I really look forward to attend your next show. Obviously, see if these numbers that we've been thrown around over the past 2 or 3 years, if they remain the same with what comes out.
Yeah, no, thank you. I believe, I'm a scientist, so I believe that numbers have to be authentic, and that's what data should be. So apart from this method that we use, there are various other methods. You have satellite imagery now, where you can track production of various crops. You have other methods. The South Africans, they really track at the tail end of what is the quality of the maize that you have produced, for example. So all those, we want to input this. So in fact, what we are doing is to come up with a crop estimates committee, which is multi-sectoral, so that everyone has their input and their method. No sector will be said to have been left out in inputting in terms of coming up with these figures. So that is what we are doing. And I believe from our side, our job is not to do the crop estimation, because that is our day-to-day job. The extension officer should be able to say, when they get to an area, how much has been plowed, how much has been planted, how much has germinated, put that into our database, and I should be able to print a report every day of which area is harvested, which area is this, which area is this, on a daily basis, S8, because that's the daily job of an extension officer, to give us that data. So crop estimation must not be an event for Agritechs. It should be our daily day-to-day duties. What should be an event is when the committee sits to say, bring us the report for today, and then we try to triangulate with other methods of estimation. That should be the event. But otherwise, these figures, from my scientific approach, they should be a report that comes in every day, or that I can pick up any day I want, and any time I want. But thank you for that. We will improve.
Yes. Thank you, Prof. I just wanted to pick from the average yield that you shared of 0.82 tons per hectare, any further triangulation or analysis to attribute it to maybe improved production practices, like is there an analysis to show?
Fumvuza, for example, yes, we have seen higher yields. I couldn't show it there. We have seen higher yields in the Fumvuza plots, but we are doing more analysis on the Fumvuza program. The average yield for the country are generally low, because there are those areas which really produce nothing. And then obviously, even if you produce quite big, if somebody produces 0, that average comes down. But what we have seen in the past season, if there is a drought, yields generally go down. So it affects on the eventual average yield. In the 2020-2021 season, the average yield was a bit higher. This season, we're working with a yield of 1.5. That's our target yield. So it varies if you all those sectors. When we go sectoral, the large-scale commercial farmers, those will give you higher yields, but the communal areas will give you an average of much less than a ton. In fact, I think in 2004, when I did it, it was about 0.3 tons per hectare for the communal areas. But yes, the improved technologies like your Fumvuza and the revamped Fumvuza this season, those should drive our average yields high. But the moment you put conventional, our average yield also goes down. So yeah.
So is a national average yield really useful? I always find it completely depressing. We're taking into consideration all these red areas which produce nothing. Is it a useful figure?
No, it's not. Definitely. So that's why we have to look at area by area, really, to make sure that we get. But when you then average it out, like you are giving a national report, it goes down. But it's not useful. It has to be area specific, and when we do the yield assessments, and estimates, we really do the farmer yield, the actual farmer yield. That's what we input.
Well, thank you, Professor. It was really great to sit through your presentation and learn quite a bit. I'm asking from the investment perspective, you obviously mentioned about the dairy sector where you would encourage investment. I work regionally and I see a lot of government initiative in aquaculture.
Yes.
Particularly Tanzania and Zambia, where I know. Do you see any strategies from the ministry to invite more public-private partnerships or any kind of strategies to increase this agricultural investment, not necessarily just in the cereal crops, but
I'm happy that you're asking, and that my boss is not here. Otherwise, you would want to listen to the answer and see if I am competent enough. But yes, we are encouraging investment. So I talked about the dairy sector because that's a glaring one. The fisheries, yes, there's a big opportunity there with all these water bodies that are there. If you go to Tokwe, for example, so is the fish business there, then you'll probably find that we are just wasting all that water. So there is a big opportunity in terms of fisheries across the country. I gave the example of carpenter moving from Kariba to Mtare. That's just not on. We must. So one of the strategies that we are doing is for those who don't have land and those who want to invest in fisheries, there is cage culture. Just a cage which you go and put in a dam, so you can rent the cage or you can buy the cage, rent water, rent space in the dam and put there. So the figures, I think the cage itself costs about between 4,000 and 6,000, and you can hold about 20 to 30,000 fish in there in a cage. That's the average cage. And from there, when you look at the kg of fish and 30,000, you probably see that you make. So that's what we are pushing, and you see that we pushed quite a lot. We are also encouraging pond culture wherever. So from the government side, what we are doing, you would know that we are drilling a borehole in each village. So 35,000 boreholes that we are drilling, and at each borehole we are putting a vegetable, a nutrition garden. We are putting a water trap for the dry regions, and we are also putting a fish pond at each borehole because there is the water. So we should have an increase in the fish pond, but we are also encouraging individuals to put however small a fish pond at your house, at your wherever, with our full technical support. So that is what we are also doing in terms of, but the real business and investment is in those large water bodies where people can rent out cage culture and so forth. But as government will put in and stock those dams. In terms of the other sectors, just as you have asked, I think you have seen the proliferation of blueberries that is coming in big, and we are supporting that fully well. I know some banks were complaining that they financed the farmer to put a center pivot, and they come this season, center pivot is there. The farmer says, I don't want your center pivot. I'll pay you for your center pivot, because now they've put drip and blueberries. And I can tell you that blueberries are paying a lot. In fact, it was its all export. Peru, who are our biggest threat, they unfortunately, Peru, they come into the market 2 weeks later than us. So our blueberries hit the market earlier, 2 weeks earlier. So we have that 2-week window. And then when the season ends, our season is also longer. So we stay in the market 2 weeks after Peru has finished. Peru is the best producer of blueberries. So you will see that in Juru, for example, we have probably the largest plantation of blueberry in Southern Africa, 60 hectares planted now. And that investor is looking for 200 hectares to put again in Mashonaland East. And those are big opportunities. I mean, you talk of pecan nuts, huge, your macadamia nuts, your avocados. So those people are now moving into those high value, and we are tracking these from the commercial side, but also from the government side. We are really saying, if an investor comes and they want blueberries, we would rather, and please don't quote me, I hope there's no media here, we would rather say, if this place is suitable for blueberry and there are A1 farmers there, we would rather say, let's have a model where they can move aside. We put the investment for the foreign currency, and we then help these A2, A1 farmers to have livelihoods. I mean, blueberry is 25-year investment, and in 25 years, those farmers, my A1, would probably not have made it. So we are really coming in with level-headedness for the first time in government. Make sure that let's do this, and let's improve investment.
Thank you so much. I just have one quick comment that we have done a survey, of the cage farming fish, and it might be useful to at least, perhaps ministry already does, but regional experiences, because cage farming among small-scale fishery has been very difficult.
It's actually a commercial venture, right, not for the small scale. So what we are saying, the model that we are working on now is that we will obviously mobilize the seed funding for example, if it's a concept that we're working on, we mobilize that initial funding to fund probably the cages. But anyone who wants to be involved, they have to come in with matching funds, which means already it's business-like. And if we get the seed funding, it becomes a revolving fund. What our model is that we have these cages in a dam, and then we have a cold room at the end, which is communal for this. So whoever wants to come in, they must sign up at the cold room, and that is what the bank tracks. So if you don't get buy-in at the cold room and you are not allowed to pay the matching funds, you cannot get into the scheme. So it's purely commercial, not government. No. Yeah.
Thank you.
Prof, we've got a question online. Based on your judgment, what is the state of preparedness of the Zimbabwe dairy, beef, crop value chains for the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement?
So for the dairy sector, they are much organized. I know that they are really pushing to have production at standards that are good enough. So the dairy value chain, I think, where we have a bit of a problem is probably our capacity to do the powders, but everything else we are doing here. And for the powders, that's what we are importing. But what we have done as government again is to put a levy on all imported milk and milk products, a 5% levy. And as of now, I think we have about from the beginning of the year, I think we are almost 1 million now from imports of milk and milk products. The idea is for us to then make sure that we grow the dairy sector and prepare it for the for regional trade. We should be able to export if we get our production right. For the crops, I think it's the horticulture which should be able to spare trade, regional trade and exports. The cereal sector, I don't think we will go the export route. I mean, maize is probably the worst crop to grow. But the other crops, blueberries, your hemp, your vegetables and so forth, those we can really do. In fact, I think standards in horticulture, they are quite known and they are good, and we should be able to be competitive in terms of regional trade. In terms of livestock, again, I think our poultry is good enough. I know IVs, for example, they are working on OIE standards and so forth. So we are competitive on the regional market in terms of broilers. So yeah, it's difficult because we are still really increasing our production. We don't have enough. We don't produce enough as a country. But if you look at those actual export crops, peanuts, blueberry, hemp, and so forth, we should be competitive enough. Thank you.
Any more questions? I've just got one. So when we saw the figure of the cattle herd, it's about 5.5 million.
Yes.
So I've heard the comment that we're a nation of cattle keepers and not cattle farmers, and that's we don't offtake enough of the herd. So that is perhaps the reason why the abattoirs are not as busy as they could be. Mm-hmm. So is it not more a case of trading farmers to farm cattle rather than trying to increase the herd to 7 million? Because already, come October, November, most years, pastures become very short, and there's the argument that stocking rates are actually too high as they are.
Yeah. So our cattle in the communal areas are not for business. They are for other things, not business. The head of cattle is probably not. You don't really value it that way. That you have 500 times 8, in terms of dollars. No, we don't. So when we look at the offtake rates, it's really that small section of farmers who are doing it for business. So it needs to be known that maybe out of the 5.5 million, what is really available for selling is probably much less than 1 million. That's that. So if you look at the tons there, multiply that by the number of cattle, the carcass weight, and so forth, you probably see that it's nothing. The bulk of our cattle are not for sale. So the challenge for us as government and in my department is to make sure that we commercialize cattle, and so we are running programs that we have. Apart from introducing better breeds, we are also trying to say, let's have, for example, one of the programs is we call it a cattle grazier scheme, where we are saying let's give a person cattle or access to cattle for them to graze them for sale or to prepare them for sale. So whether they do pen fattening or whatever, but they are really doing it for for the market. So yes, our cattle are not for sale; they are for other purposes. But we need to increase that section of cattle that is for business.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jen.
So I just want to comment on the livestock. Some people would say that cattle is not very climate friendly, and we should be doing much more in terms of moving to goat production and eating more goat meat. Is the ministry doing anything about that?
You should have been in my interview when I was interviewed for this job. So one of the panelists So what are you going to do about goats? So I in an interview, say all sorts of things. So I said, I'm going to make sure that there's a goat market and a goat whatever and a goat this. Me being able to talk, so I'm here now. So, but we do have cattle breeds that are suitable for our country. Definitely, our Mashona cattle, our Mashona breeds are good. The only problem is the inbreeding, so now they are just this size. And you have these people that bring in these bigger breeds and so forth, which may not be suitable. But we do have our breeds that are, our indigenous breeds that are suitable. The Boran, for example, is excellent for our climate. So it's not true that cattle are not suitable for our climate. They are. But they are much more expensive to bring up. The goats are perfect because they are much more suitable, depending on the region. If you take the Matebele goat, for example, it does very well in Matebele land. The Mashona goat, it does very well in Mashona land, but it's much smaller. But yes, we need to do something about the goats. And I don't have an answer for you right now of what we are doing, but we will do something about goats. Thank you.
So maybe one final question for me. I was really surprised to see that the contribution from Harare and Bulawayo in terms of maize production was zero. What about urban agriculture? We see quite a lot of it. So how did we end up with a figure of zero?
So in terms of Harare and Bulawayo, in terms of production, Harare is taken care of by Mashonaland East. So those figures from Mashonaland East take care of Harare. And Mat South takes care of Bulawayo.
Okay.
Yes, in terms of peri-urban and urban farming. So those listeners would be in there.
So if there are no more questions, just what is left is to thank the Chief Director. I can't remember the rest. Your title, sir.
Agritechs.
Very much for coming in and sharing this this work with us. So.
Thank you. And please allow me to leave because I have to travel. So thank you very much. I will come again if you call.
We'll be calling you.
Thank
you so much.
Thank you.
So thanks everyone for your attendance and those online. We hope that this was useful for you and look forward to seeing some of you again next month. Thank you.
Thank you.